Good afternoon, Terps. My name is Jeff Williams, the Associate Executive Director for Alumni Engagement and Outreach at the University of Maryland Alumni Association. We're glad you're able to join us for today's webinar on virtual and augmented reality, opportunities for investors and creators. This session is part of the Alumni Association's Professional Development Webinar Series, where we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. Past topics have included Spring into Action, a series on financial wellness, best practices in working with a recruiter, and grow your sales in the Amazon Marketplace, among other topics. During today's webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box to share any questions or comments you might have for the presenter. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session, and a presenter will answer them as often as possible. And who is our presenter? Today we are joined by Lucien Parsons, Founding Director of the Mixed Augmented and Virtual Reality Innovation Center at the University of Maryland. With 20 years of technology and strategy consulting and over 10 years in video game company management, Lucien has been at the forefront of the changes that has turned computer science into a tool for creative people, not just engineers and accountants. Having bootstrapped startups, run fully funded studios, and worked in and with Fortune 50 corporations, he is uniquely suited to bring together a diverse set of stakeholders and discover the common interests and goals between them. He is also the lead organizer for the inaugural Mixed Augmented Virtual Reality Innovation Conference being held this October at the University of Maryland. Lucien holds an MBA in Innovation from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, an MA in International Technology Policy from Johns Hopkins, and a bachelor's degree from Hendrix College. And now I'll turn it over to Lucien.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I appreciate the great intro there. Before I get into the meat of the talk about the opportunities for investors and creators around augmented and virtual reality, I wanted to talk just briefly about what we're doing at the University of Maryland in this subject. And so the first thing that we have done is start this new program, which is called MAVRIC. And MAVRIC has been created almost exactly a year ago now in order to bring together some of the regional power and capabilities of the university system, the startups and the corporations in the region and around the federal government. And the reason that we've done that is because we believe that the Mid-Atlantic region can become a center of gravity for this technology. Right now, when somebody thinks about AR or VR, they're almost always thinking about Seattle, California, maybe New York. But there are a lot of resources here in the area, and we want to make sure that those are well known and also give them a boost so that when our Terps graduate, they have an option to work in this field without having to move across the country. And then we also want to help make sure that there's a diverse group of participants in the technology. Traditionally, some of these newer technologies have been dominated by a particular socioeconomic group. And so one of the things that we're working really hard at is to help find ways that anyone who wants to be a creator in this area, not just a consumer, can do so. And lastly, of course, this is the University of Maryland. So how can we help build the university's reputation when we are already a leader in XR, and I'll define some terms here in a second, but especially with the new developments going on around the Brendan Reeb Center being developed on campus, 2 new endowed chairs having been created as part of that as well, which are both focused on virtual and augmented reality. And the really quite remarkable ratings of the university in the fundamental technologies around this area, even though we tend to not have the name recognition that some of our competitors in that area. For example, we are the #3 school in the world in computer vision and in computer rendering. We're one of the top 10 in natural language processing. All of these are technologies that really are fundamental to making AR and VR work. So I'll skip this slide, but so that you have an idea of who's speaking to you. This is me. Jeff did such a good job introducing me. I'll just keep moving. Virtual and augmented reality, what are they? So I'm going to show you a few things and define those terms first. And the reason that I want to do that is because although coming from a technology and gaming background, which I do, pretty much everybody's aware of VR and AR. I find that in most groups that I'm talking to, there's a significant percentage, as much as 80%, who have heard the term VR, may or may not know what it stands for, but have never actually tried it themselves. And so I think it's worth spending a few minutes just to make sure that everybody knows what we're actually talking about. I am going to try to show a couple of videos during this talk, and we're not sure that the audio for those videos will come through. So please do use the chat box if you're having trouble hearing or there's no audio for you. Let us know. I'm happy to just talk about what's on the video instead of doing the audio if that's what it takes. So let me start this first one about virtual reality. So what we saw there is a experience created by a company called The Void, and they are opening a location-based VR place in DC here soon. You are a participant in the experience, but the world that you're looking at has been created artificially. It's all computer generated. And so one form of virtual reality is this computer generated system. The other kind of traditional VR is the 360 video based VR. Or immersive media is another term. And unfortunately, we have lots of terms. Nobody's really decided what these things should be called yet. But in this case, the things that you are experiencing are real, but what's different than a traditional filmmaker's experience or having a camera is that the user gets to decide where they're looking. And they can decide that either by if they're looking at it on a phone or another flat screen device, like a computer, you can use your mouse or a controller to move around in the world. Or if you have a head-mounted device, which was what we saw a minute ago, and here's some examples of that, you can also just move your head. And what that allows is for a completely different level of immersion than what we've seen with 2D or even with films. Believe it or not, these two devices that you see on your screen right now, and these are what are considered high-end VR devices. One is the Oculus Rift, and the other one is the HTC Vive. Despite their similarities, they are actually different devices made by different companies. And then at the low end of the spectrum, we have devices like this, the Gear VR, and the piece there in the middle that says Gear VR on the front is actually your phone. And so what you do is you strap your phone into one of these, and the phone becomes the optics for your experience. Those are considered low-end devices because compared to running it with a dedicated computer, the resolution's not as high, the experience is just not as good. So those are all ways to experience VR and the two different major types of it. The next type that we'll talk about is augmented reality. Here we have an image where you are seeing what's in front of you, but through the app there on the iPad, you're getting additional information. And so it is augmenting your view. And that can either be screen-based, as this is, or head-mounted display. Augmented reality got a huge kind of boost from the release of Pokemon Go. Everybody kind of became aware of it as a possibility. Ironically, this is not actually an AR experience. It's a location-based experience, and the reason I say it's not really AR is because the images, although they're being overlaid on top of what you have nearby, are not interacting or working with what the reality around you. They're just kind of a screen in front of the reality. So if I was looking here instead of at a park at the dashboard of my car, it would still show the Snorlax there as sitting basically within my dashboard. It doesn't take into account distance and things like that. But the other way that augmented reality has been developed, besides the phones and screens, is with dedicated head-mounted devices like this Epson device. And those are very interesting. The first one of those, of course, was Google Glass, which you may or may not have heard of, but created quite a stir at the time that it was released for not all very good reasons. And then the third kind of reality that I wanted to present today is what's called mixed reality. And here we have a HoloLens type device, which is made by Microsoft. And the difference there is, unlike augmented reality, where you see the world and it tells you information about that world, with mixed reality, the idea is that not only do you get more information in your viewpoint, but you also have an ability to interact with it. And so this is a video that I took this morning on my desk, holding something called a merge cube. And you can see it kind of peeking through the heart. And basically the merge cube is just a way, and you can see it better now, of giving the system a target to look at and to connect something else to. So in this case, this is an anatomy app. I got to see the heart both as you would see it, and then this cutaway view so that I can understand the internal parts of it better. And that mixed reality, that ability to reach over, pick it up, turn it around, interact with it is really what makes it a mixed experience. So again, VR, you're putting the user into a different or artificial world, which may or may not be artificial, but somewhere they aren't right now. In AR, you're adding information to their current environment, and in MR, you are interacting with the current environment in some new way that wouldn't necessarily be possible without this technology. So let's talk about now where we are. And I promise to be brief about this. And there's a date problem right there. So the initial VR stereoscope that was actually in 1883. It was those two pictures that they had on a postcard, and you had a little set of lenses and that held them out way away from your face. ViewMaster kind of perfected that into the little toy Viewmaster in 1939, but it was even predated by the Link Trainer, which was the first flight simulator. In 1961, we started to have what we would recognize or consider kind of a technical solution, where you had remote camera controls and a lovely device that was known as the Sword of Damocles, not for its destructive potential, but because the headset was so heavy, they had to have basically a crane hold it in the room above your head and move around with you. So wherever you walked around, you had this giant thing hanging over you. And then as we moved further into the 90s, we got the first kind of consumer versions, which includes the ill-fated Nintendo Virtual Boy. And then things started kind of kicking off around 2012 when Oculus and Magic Leap raised their first rounds to create what we would call modern VR. Google Glass launched in 2013, which put a little tiny screen, literally less than an inch wide, in the corner of your view on a pair of glasses frames. And then the Vive was announced and was launched in 2015, the HoloLens in 2016. Google Glass rebooted after being completely rejected by the consumer market for being too creepy, primarily in 2017 for enterprise use, and they actually sell more today than they ever did before. And just this year, and actually in the last month, the much anticipated and hyped Magic Leap 1 has launched. So I'd love to show you a few of the things that UMD is doing in this area. And again, if you can't hear the video, please let us know. Okay, it sounds like the audio didn't work for everybody there. So I'm going to briefly summarize. What they did was an experiment to see whether people learned better in VR or on a flat screen, and by putting images in an area throughout the area, and then the virtual area, and then asking people to remember where they were. And what they found was that there was a 8.8% improvement in recall in the VR experience compared to the flat screen. And 8.8 seems kind of small until you realize that that's the difference between a C and a B, or a B and an A in most cases. And so from an academic standpoint, that's fairly significant. It's also very significant if you're talking about something where you're training tens of thousands of people, perhaps, and their ability to recall information can be improved. Most training programs talk about improving recall by 2 to 5% as a major success, and so 8.8% is actually very significant in this context. And then Another use that we've been using for is in the medical area. So again, and just in case people weren't able to hear that, what we're doing there, and that was a HoloLens device that they were using, and you saw her wearing, which is the mixed reality device. The doctor is being able to see the imagery from the ultrasound as she uses it in real time, overlaid on the patient. And what this means is that the ultrasound operator, the doctor, is able to keep their eyes on the patient instead of turning and looking the other direction to see a screen. Right now, a significant amount of surgery is done with the physician looking at a screen instead of at the patient. And what this opens up the possibility for is to be able to do both at the same time. Regionally, beyond the University of Maryland, I've been working with all of these groups and many, many more to figure out how we can use augmented and virtual reality for a variety of different purposes. But the most interesting ones right now are in the training and simulation space, and including in healthcare. And also a significant interest locally about what the future of journalism and media looks like. So we said this is an opportunity for investors. So where's the opportunity? And what does the future look like here? And so I've set this up as, is it AR, is it VR? So as far back as 15 years ago, Minority Report came out and showed what might happen if you were walking, in this case, walking through the mall. It recognizes you, gives you personal kind of things. This is one extreme of what might be possible with augmented reality, where in your daily lives you are getting new information, hopefully most of it opt-in, things that you want to see, and that's always an ethical consideration when we're looking at new technologies, as you go about your day. The other end of this would be something along the lines of what we saw demonstrated in Ready Player One recently, if you've seen that film, where you are entering into, in this case, the OASIS, and seeing a new world, and having people spend some or a significant portion of their lives living and working in this new world. or it may be something else entirely that we haven't considered yet. And so and the reason that we don't know what that is because if you looked at the early investment here, 2012, Oculus Kickstarter raised $2.5 million on Kickstarter. In 2014, it was purchased by Facebook for $2 billion, which created an awful lot of investment interest as being one of the more spectacular exits in modern history. In 2012, Magic Leap raised its first $500 million round. And in 2015, it raised another $827 million. And it looks like they're about to close a third round that will bring their total investment above $3 billion. So there we have Oculus on the VR side, we have Magic Leap on the MR side, and they're both receiving significant investment and attention. And if you look at the deal volume, you have the same thing. Although the AR area, you'll see that the deal volume was much lower through 15 and 16 compared to the VR deal volume. But we're still here at the kind of beginning phases of this. And as you can see, the expected market size, so commercial market, moving away from the investment for a minute, is expected to be about 27 I think this is in billions. Yeah, $27 billion for this year, and growing over the course of the next 4 years to more than 10 times that. I've looked at a lot of these forecasts, and they're all over the place. I've seen numbers as high as $500 billion by 2022. This is kind of where I think consensus lies. But what's interesting about it, and I don't have on this slide, is that about 80% of the predicted market size from this year through 2022 is in AR. So it's the augmented reality, and I'm including MR in that because it's really hard to draw the distinction between it unless you're in terms of where the investment is, because a significant amount of this is going to be companies and corporations and government agencies figuring out how to use this to train people better and to improve operational efficiency. So one of the local companies is working with one of the airlines, not the airlines, the aircraft manufacturers, and I don't know how much of this is public. I can share the generic but not the names. And they have replaced a paper-based process for wiring diagrams with an augmented reality process, and found a 40% improvement in accuracy. And frankly, a 40% improvement in people building my airplane is something that I'm really in favor of. So I think there's a lot of good potential here, especially in that area. So if it's so awesome, why hasn't it already taken over? Why aren't people walking down the street with headsets? And there's a couple of different reasons. One is historical. So in the 90s, in order to justify creating a VR experience, and I'll use VR to be a catch-all throughout most of the rest of this talk, just because I don't want to say VR, AR, MR, XR, immersive media, 360, etc. You needed a $250 million problem. Now, to get a $250 million problem, one of two things had to be true. Either you were putting 100,000 people plus through something that was repeatable and understandable in a VR situation on an annual basis, or it was really, really expensive if you had a failure out of that training. And so the place where we got VR in the 90s was the same place we'd gotten VR in the 1930s, and that was in flight trainers. They were much, much better than the 1930s, but it was indeed the place where, well, if I crash a $30 million plane and I kill multiple people, that's a $250 million problem. Once the 2000s came around, some of that technology was cheaper. We still didn't have really any type of commercial devices available, and so that cost was still, you know, in the $75 million range in terms to justify that return. Once we'd gotten that technology a little better, and before the modern headsets had still come out, that number had dropped significantly, primarily due to processing power and the rise of graphics cards. By 2020, I expect we need a $10 million or less problem, and by 2030, we probably need $1 million problem. $1 million problem is a very small problem, and I am being very conservative in this. To look at it from the other direction, what would it cost to actually build a VR experience across this time frame? Well, back in the 90s, it cost hundreds of millions of dollars. You had custom hardware, you had custom software, you had to basically invent everything as you were going along. We started to understand that a little better. It dropped dramatically. And then once this, you know, the Vive and the Oculus and some of these other, and the HoloLens had really launched here in the 2015 area, that number is dropping really fast. So at this point, I advise people that you need probably $2 million to create a really worthwhile experience to for somebody in VR or AR. And it's certainly possible for marketing and things like that to do this at a much lower level. What I'm talking about is something that provides a significant improvement in training, or a significant entertainment property, or something along those lines. And that number is, again, dropping very, very rapidly. The second reason that we haven't seen it yet is more of a technological problem. So there is not a hero device now. And, you know, the hero device is the thing that everybody wants, everybody needs, and kind of coalesces the market around it. Creates imitators probably very rapidly, but it's the one that everybody's looking at. And of course, Apple has created one of the first hero devices of the recencying with the iPhone, which we'll talk about here in just a second. The second is battery life. Right now, none of these devices that are, even if you're using your phone, you can use it in an AR mode for about 5 to 10 minutes before it heats up to the point where it shuts down. This is because we've taken a computer chip and encased it in an insulator called glass, which is a really terrible thing to do to a computer chip. The purpose-built devices don't do that. They optimize for heat and for other things, but even with that, you're looking at an hour or two of use max on any of the devices that are out there right now. The third is just enough bandwidth. There's been great strides in that. You know, Generation 5 technology promises that it will deliver enough bandwidth for this to happen, but a lot of the use cases, especially when you start looking at things like I want to be able to recognize objects in my room or in my environment without having to hand build everything. There's just a lot of processing power required for that, processing power that we cannot currently put onto a small chip, and therefore we have to think of how we get that information to a cloud server and deliver the information back. So bandwidth is a big part. The fourth thing is because we don't have a hero device, nobody's created a whole bunch of content. There's a bit of a chicken and egg problem there. You can't get people to buy it until you have something for them to do on it. You can't get people to build things to do on it until there's people buying it. And then the last part is affordability with the announcement of the new iPhone. Top-end iPhone is $1,500 now. That's the closest thing we have to a ubiquitous AR device. There is still a significant financial barrier for adoption, although clearly people are willing to pay the $1,000 that the last version of the iPhone cost. But that still doesn't get us to 1 billion users around the world. So I was talking about the hero device, and one of the reasons that hero device is really important is if you think about where the iPhone was when it announced, and it was a phone that let me get email and text. That's great. I had a BlackBerry that did that, and this one didn't have a physical keyboard. A lot of, especially professionals, laughed at it. It's like, what's wrong with these people? And it wasn't until the app ecosystem took off and people started discovering other things you could do with the phone that it really became a mass market device. We're at that point in VR right now. If you pretend it's 2007 as far as VR and AR are concerned, one of the things is that we legitimately don't know what it will be used for yet. We think we do. We think, simulation training is really big. The military alone is going to spend $500 million a year on VR training over the next few years. But right now we don't have a dominant platform. All of these companies would like to be that dominant platform. And we still don't know where the money is going to come from. So given that, where is the opportunity space? Well, I really do believe, and I'm probably overstated this at this point, but training and operations for corporations. Almost every major company is looking at this in one way or another. Whether it be for design purposes, such as this one, or the training you saw in the Walmart before, or actually going in and looking at the way that a particular machine might work, and running simulations there within the virtual environment to try to optimize things before the first part is built, or taking a machine that is already running or not running properly, and giving people the tools to be able to repair it in a timely manner. Obviously, the military is using this, as I mentioned. They put $500 million into it last year. They're going to do that again this year, for both training and operations. The military has a few advantages in the way that they use it, in that they are used to putting heavy things on their heads, called a helmet, and so that is a incremental problem for them rather than a first part problem. A lot of people who haven't used the technology are kind of hesitant to put on something that blocks their view of the world, and then move around in a room where other people might be, and they might trip over things. And if you've watched any of the videos of people looking at the inside of a car engine through VR and trying to lean on the side of the car and falling over, or they're playing virtual pool and they try to lean on the table and they fall on their face. There's some good reasons for that. So I want to leave time for questions, but I would love for anybody here to get involved. If you are interested in AR or VR, MAVRIC is here to be a conduit for that interest, to help connect you to startups, to corporations, to government agencies, whoever it may be, and to, of course, to the university itself, where we're doing some great fundamental research. You can reach me via email or phone. There is, as Jeff mentioned, a MAVRIC conference coming up. It's October 17th and 18th. You can find more information about that on our website, mavric.umd.edu. We're going to have some great people there. The website is being updated this week to show the speakers who have accepted, but we've got people from multiple government agencies, multiple corporations, attending and talking. And then obviously you can also reach us on Twitter or Facebook. And we'd love it if you have friends that are interested in this area to connect with them. So I'm going to leave this up here in case anybody would like any of the contact information, and ask Jeff to navigate the questions that may have come in the comments and chat. If I open the chat window for some reason, it erases the screen on the webinar. So apologize for that technical difficulty.
Thank you, Lucien, and I am here to help moderate questions. So just as a reminder for anyone in the listening today, to please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. And we do have several that have come in. The first one was from Shelley. She was asking about some of the local VR, AR firms and startups here in the DMV area, and also how many people are working on VR in the region.
Yeah, so I listed just a few of the local startups. As I said, MAVRIC's about a year old. In the last year, I've talked to 1,200 people, not including presentations I've given at places like Rotary clubs and Better Business or business clubs around the area. That's one-on-one conversations. The VR club at the university itself has 800 participants. The DC VR meetup, which I collaborate with, has 2,000 people on their list. Baltimore's meetup has over 1,000 people, and I am guessing, because I haven't met with everybody, but I'm guessing there's over 100 startups just in the District, Maryland, Virginia area. And not to mention that, as I said, almost every major corporation I have talked with is doing something or exploring something around AR or VR in the area as well.
Great, and we have another question from Brenda. Is anyone using AR, VR for math education, or I guess we can make it more generally education? And a question here, if you know, Lucien, is Wolfram involved?
Wolfram, as in
That's
Wolfram
correct.
Alpha? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know about Wolfram Alpha's involvement at all. I apologize, but in terms of education, yes, there's an entire subset, and I should have brought that up, of VR use around education. We're at a kind of interesting point in education, and I've been involved in games for education for a significant amount of time, where the technology that's available far outstrips the ability for the school districts and the teachers to absorb what's available fast enough and to actually implement it. So there's a lot of interest. I've had the Frederick County School District, the PG County School District, the Montgomery County School District, Fairfax County, all have reached out to MAVRIC already and said, hey, how can we incorporate more of this into our curriculums? They're just not able to move very quickly with that. And part of it goes back to this lack of a hero device, to a, hey, what's the platform I should buy into? Because they have they need high throughput, they need cheap, and they need durable. We really don't have a good answer for those three things yet. Even with that, though, there are a lot of kind of specialty educational uses. So MAVRIC is working with some researchers here at the university, building VR experiences for people with autism to help them learn certain skills. And then we're also working with that same group to build a VR experience for educators, parents, and others, including police officers potentially, to understand what autism really does, what it is, and how it operates, because there are sensitivities there that it is very, very difficult for a neurotypical person to appreciate and fully understand, and the presence of VR actually creates an opportunity to create that understanding at a much deeper level. And so we're really excited about that use. Florio in downtown DC is also working around the idea of autism, and they're working with a couple of school districts on that, including ones that MAVRIC has been part of introducing them to.
Great, thank you. We have another question here. What AR apps do you recommend for those interested in utilizing basic AR concepts into multimedia projects?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So I'm not sure if we're asking about what tools to use to build something, or what commercially available things there are. So I'll just answer both of those and see if, and then if I still haven't answered the right question, please let us know. So the two big tools that have been used to create kind of artificial VR experiences are Unity and Unreal. Those are actually game development engines, but which is one of the reasons that I'm here, is because so many of the things overlap with game development, and from my years in doing that. Beyond that, there are a couple of really quite good online web-based tools that will let you take 360 videos and other assets and create your own kind of VR experience with branching narrative even, and with opportunities for the users to have agency to make choices within those. Going blank, I apologize on what those would be, but if you look for 360 AR VR experiences engine, you would find something, or feel free to reach out to me via the email or other methods, and I'm happy to point you to some. Wanda VR would be one, actually. And then in terms of looking at commercially available things, it really is highly dependent on what you're trying to do. So local company Balti Virtual has a app called Apparate, APPAR, the number 8, where they have created a number of experiences based around having some sort of tag in the world. One of them is the University of Maryland logo, and look through the phone, you see the logo, and then it generates a cartoon Terp on top of the logo who dances around. He is, by the way, the first time I've ever been scared of a Terp. He's a very tough-looking character. Another direction that might take would be something like the merge cube. So the thing that I was showing the video of with the heart. There's an entire library of augmented reality things that go from games to a solar system explorer to the anatomy, actually multiple anatomy type apps. And the Merge Cube, you can buy it on Amazon for like 11 bucks. It's actually just made of foam. And so that's a super cheap way if you've got a smartphone and you buy one of those and start playing with it to see what's kind of possible out there. So hopefully one of those answered the question.
Great. Yeah, it looked like it was for the some of those products you mentioned. So thank you. I have another question here. What are specific opportunities at MAVRIC, and just I guess also generally, how can alumni get more involved in the work being done at MAVRIC?
Well, by all means, reach out to me directly here. I am always. I see my job as at MAVRIC as the director as a connector, and so what I am doing with a significant amount of the time is talking to people about here's the problem I'm trying to address, here's the question I'm trying to answer, and either I can help you find that answer, or I can connect you to somebody who can, whether that person is associated with the university or not. In terms of what MAVRIC is doing, we have the outreach. We're bringing in speakers, not only for the conference, but on a regular basis to try to help people in this area get exposure to what AR and VR are about, both at a professional level, working with groups like DCVR, but also at the school district, working with nonprofits, and the other schools around the region even. So we have a project with Coppin State that will kick off in the spring, where we're bringing in an instructor from a company to teach the students to use 360 cameras and to edit, and providing those cameras and providing the software to then do the editing with it, so that the students can take that opportunity to be creators, and this is at the college level, and then they're going to turn around as part of their coursework and go into the high schools and work with the high school students to do the same thing, so that we can try to reach students, before they've decided whether they will or not go to college, but also what they're going to do there, and expose them to these new technologies as a creator, not a consumer.
Great, thank you. Another question, you've mentioned some of the potential uses within education, but what are some of the other governmental use cases for the technology?
So obviously the military has been very, very interested in the training and simulation part, but they're also across the entire gamut of federal government, and some state governments are already here as well. Data analysis is very, very important. So right now, there's been a revolution in data analysis, obviously, with machine intelligence and AI. One of the problems that still remains is helping people understand what's coming out of that, and as we shifted from rows of numbers on a spreadsheet to creating charts and graphs about information, that unlocked a way for us to convey large amounts of information quickly. There are several groups, including the Army Research Lab, that are looking at how do we now transition what we've looked at in 2D into 3D environments. The HCIL group, the Human Computer Interaction Lab here on campus, has actually created a 3D visual analysis tool in VR where I can load it with, preload it with data sets and grab at any two axes out of that data set and physically bring them together with my hands, and bang, it creates a 2D chart for me. And then I can reach over and grab another axis and stick it on the front, and now I have a 3D graph of those data sets, and I can manipulate the scale of those sets. I can rotate, I can zoom in and out, all through just hand gestures and using the controllers. So I think there's a huge potential there in the data world. And that's already being used for everything from emergency responses. Actually, the Weather Channel last week partnered with Unreal or Epic, the makers of Unreal, to show what the flooding might actually look like from Hurricane Florence. So that was to warn the population, hey, don't take this, or please take this seriously, because this is what 10 inches of rain actually does to a street. And then on the other side, looking at geodata and working with it in VR, NASA has been particularly involved with looking at the vast amount of data they generate on a daily basis. Training and simulation for firefighters, first responders, police officers, and if I sat here and thought about it, I'd probably come up with half a dozen more, but hopefully that's a good smattering. Oh, cybersecurity actually is one area that's also very interesting.
Great, and thank you so much. It looks like we are running out of time, but we do appreciate the webinar, Lucien. And is there any final words that you'd like to mention before we wrap up?
No, I would love to talk. The fact that you've shown up for this webinar indicates your interest. I would love to interact with you directly. Please do use any of these contact methods to reach out, and I will be happy to come talk to you on the phone, come and talk to you in person even, or by all means would love to have you at the MAVRIC conference. We'll be presenting talks from 35 different speakers across this entire gamut. A great set of education talks, a great set of data analysis group people, and lots of training and simulation, and some future of media and future of journalism as well. So would love to see you there. Thank you so much, Jeff, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lucien, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you again at our next webinar, How Networking Can Lead to Great Business Success, happening Wednesday, September 26th at noon Eastern Time. A recording of today's webinar will be posted to the Alumni Association website. In addition, we will send out via email the videos in Lucien's presentation today, as well as links to the MAVRIC Center and their upcoming conference in October. Hope everyone has a great day, and go Terps.
Go Terps.